Incentivization versus cost. Fees tend to be a serious hot potato for hedge fund managers. Tricky subject that managers struggle to explain and investors struggle to understand. And the two main arguments tend to come down to specialization, where hedge funds have specialized in a particular strategy and wish to be incentivized and rewarded for pursuing this level of specialization, and strategy capacity, where the strategy perhaps has a liquidity limit. Perhaps it could only take up to 5 billion, whereas a traditional fund could take 50 billion within that strategy. A hedge fund strategy might be so esoteric, so unique, only up to 5 billion rand could the manager conceivably generate good returns out of that strategy, and therefore needs to maximize his personal return by increasing his fees. Now, some people take issue with this approach, but to that we typically say that hedge funds are not for everyone. And ultimately, taking the approach of fees being appropriate versus fees being low enough is the better way to approach the fee question. Hedge funds tend to be expensive not because of their high management fees. Hedge fund management fees now have realigned to be similar to what typical boutique traditional unit trust managers charge. However, they do add the performance fee component. What's nice about performance fees is they are only paid when hedge fund managers outperform. Again, against this background of limited capacity and specialist strategies, this makes a lot of sense. Align the hedge fund manager's interest to your interest by compensating him excessively only if he outperforms his benchmark. One massive caveat to this is that benchmark needs to be appropriate. If a hedge fund manager is running a market cognizant, risky fund that is taking a high amount of equity risk, it should have an equity benchmark for determining performance fees. There's no sense in pursuing equity-like returns and collecting performance fees above cash. That is a relic of older hedge funds, which is still somewhat prevalent in the market and needs to be addressed. But beyond that, we believe that performance fees are an excellent way of keeping hedge fund managers aligned to their investors, and when those strategies do start knocking against those capacity constraints, because hedge fund managers would prefer to collect performance fees, they will push against asset hoarding. Because ultimately what happens with the race to the bottom on fees is if managers keep on taking assets, the performance tends to be diluted away over time. And this is a well-studied phenomena where larger managers tend to underperform smaller managers. And that comes down to strategy capacity in the simplest of terms. And ultimately, we as the investors want to keep performing and therefore incentivize our underlying managers through their compensation to keep that performance coming, as opposed to putting this relentless pressure on fees, which may encourage asset hoarding. One of the situations we come across is where an investor looks at a fact sheet and sees an incredibly high total expense ratio, or TER, 8%, 12%, and they get a fright thinking, that's way too much. I can't pay that high for this investment. So two things to bear in mind. A, fund returns are reported after fees. If a manager has collected those kinds of fees, in all likelihood it means that the performance fees were enormous because the outperformance above benchmark were enormous. The other thing to remember is that TERs are backwards looking. Some mancos report them over 12 months, some over 36 months. But that is the point. That is not what you are paying coming into a fund. If you come into a fund today and that fund simply performs the same as benchmark, you will pay the management fee only, which is between typically 1 and 1.5%. However, if it outperforms, you'll pay more because that performance fee will start accruing. If I could, in hindsight, see that a fund was going to be collecting an 8 or 12% TER over the next 12 months, you'd see me jumping into that fund immediately, because that would indicate I'm going to get, on an after fee basis, enormous returns above benchmark, enormous returns above expectation. Now, these are high fees. There's no getting around that. The fact that we do report post fees does alleviate that somewhat, and it makes all investments highly comparable. But I think we have to acknowledge that this is not for everyone. And with hedge funds, it really is a case of you get what you pay for. And even though all investors are not willing to pay for that, nobody is forcing them. But we believe that on an after fee basis, assuming you get that outperformance above benchmark, which a cheap investment is very rarely going to give you, it's worth your money.